I'm hoping that out of a very bad situation, which is the COVID-19, can come a sort of cultural shift to how we deal with these situations of crisis. So, we have to still, even as we deal with the clear and present danger that is COVID-19, we have to still be mindful of the seasonalities that climate change can bring, both in terms of the impact on food security and also on human health.
I wanted to talk to you about the climate change agenda and how possibly COVID-19 is eclipsing the climate change agenda of the Caribbean.
It's an excellent question. Globally, I think everybody is focused on the COVID-19 issue. It's a big issue. Many lives lost, many lives affected by it, to the point where the economic agenda globally is turned upside down. So I think that has drawn the attention and the focus of the entire globe, including those who would be champions politically of the climate change agenda. Here in the Caribbean, while our numbers are not as large at this moment, it is on the uptick. And I think we ourselves are heavily focused on it. So much so, we at CDEMA, we've had to really try to balance the upcoming hurricane season. While we're talking about climate change, the implications of a dry period now, for example, in Barbados and many of the other islands, and the impending rainy season, which will come for some, which will lead us into a very active hurricane season, is something that we've had to try to bring the attention of our emergency managers and our political leaders back to center on, simply because we have no choice. We will be dealing with it when it comes. And so I do believe that it is somehow fading a little bit, but there are still those who are trying to ensure that the climate change agenda still remains center to the conversation. And insofar as we're able to link some of the climate change related issues that we would be contending with, juxtaposed to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 issues. So we're seeing where we're trying to link the two from the point of view of the proximity of what could be a multi-hazard context within which we're operating.
Right. I mean, so you said a lot in there that addresses some of the points that I have here. So first of all, let's talk about the parallels. So for instance, you have here climate change and COVID-19, the parallel between food security, the threats to food security, the threat to our health system. Talk a little bit more about those parallels.
So when we discuss climate change in its own space, we are really looking at the implications for a number of things, food security being one of them, in terms of the implications for seasonal rainfall and what that would do to annual yields. The prolonged dry conditions that would impact yield, but also the implication it has year over year for driving people out of the agro industry. Many of the small farming communities we've seen where it becomes more difficult for them each year, to the point where they're not encouraging their young ones to really take on that as a profession going forward. So it's multifaceted. It's what we're dealing with in the here and now, but also what we stand to lose in the longer term, where we're seeing more and more farmlands coming out of production because it is difficult, not only because of the decreasing rainfall, but the viability of the land itself, because the soil will also lose its nutrients and its effectiveness over time. Then we have to look at the COVID crisis and the impact it is having on the livelihood, on the labor force. Where you're now potentially seeing people, becoming so ill that numerous farms, numerous production houses have had to close down. Recently, we're watching on the U.S. news, and there's a pig farm that has had to close its doors because the staff are all ill. Farmlands where their produce rotting in the fields because there's no one to harvest them. So, when we're dealing with what is a slow creeping problem, at the same time, we're now having to deal with the very present challenges that COVID-19 is posing to food security within the region and the globe. And we must recognize that right now we do import quite a bit of our food. So if we have a dependency for imports, that is also being disrupted by the challenges that are being faced in countries that we tend to look to. And here now we look at climate change also and the impact it has on the environmental health component of things. Right now we would have been, if we cast our minds a few years back, you would have been dealing with chickpea and Zika coming into January, February, and March. We would be looking at the whole threat of dengue as a result of the resurgence of those vectors as a result of the climate change phenomena, which we know have tend to provide a space, a breeding ground for those particular vectors. So our health systems would have had to go through this over several years. The public health space is one that remains very heightened for climate-related, environmental, health-related hazards. And now we have on our hands the COVID-19 situation, which is putting our health sector on a strain. The health sector prior to COVID-19 would have already been not in the best position, the health infrastructure. And so now our ministries of health have had to be really planning, figuring out how they're going to manage a potential high caseload on an infrastructure that is already not in the best of shape. And this bearing in mind the potential for other issues to come down the line in terms of hurricane season, which could see increased health needs, as well as I've said before, the vectors that themselves can also bring additional pressures onto the health sector. So, we have to still, even as we deal with the clear and present danger that is COVID-19, we have to still be mindful of the seasonalities that climate change can bring, both in terms of the impact on food security and also on human health.
So in your talks with the region, because you take this disaster preparedness, disaster risk management, everything on a regional level, talking to all the heads of the respective governments and whatnot, well, how has that conversation been? Talking to different Caribbean countries about this present danger and the danger that lies ahead as the year goes on.
That's a very important question. I think in my engagement with the community recently, there is understandably a heavy focus on the COVID-19 issues. We have started to sensitize the various political directorate based on ministerial portfolio on the other issues that we're facing. Recently, we would have had to brief the COSHAD and the consulate. These are the health and security related governance arrangements for CARICOM in the region. There is, as you would have heard from the Honorable Prime Minister Motley, a pending emergency heads of government meeting, where we have put to the Secretary General the need to also discuss the hurricane season and the implications that that could present for the region, but also the multi-hazard context, as I've said before, between the drought and the rainy season and the hurricane season. So, I mean, we're putting it on the agenda. We have shared several presentations on the need for us to really think through what a COVID scenario could mean within the context of the hurricane season. And so we're hoping that that will really bring sharp attention or some balance to the multiplicity of the challenges that we can face, or the multifaceted nature of the hazard landscape we have in the Caribbean. At the moment, what we're working on, which we will also elevate to the leadership of our member states, is refining our hurricane season checklist to really try to hone in on the potential challenges that a COVID-19 scenario could present. And this will help them to shift the focus a little bit to a balanced space on thinking through the food security issue, because that's part of our state of readiness, the shelter management issue, where some shelters are likely to be used as we see here in Barbados, to be used as isolation points. What would shelter mean for a community that may be seeing community spread of the COVID-19, but where you need to move people to security, safe shelter? What will that mean in terms of managing the social distancing arrangements that are being put in place? What does it mean for us to deploy assets into a country that may be themselves overwhelmed, both by COVID and by the hurricane? And will we be able to field the number of personnel and experts to be able to deploy in a safe context the procurement of goods for preparing for the hurricane season? We see already challenges in getting goods out of our traditional markets for preparing and responding to COVID. Could we see a similar problem in terms of our efforts to procure goods out of those markets as well? So there's a range of issues we have to think through when we talk about hurricane season readiness, that we have to really bring our heads of government and or disaster management ministers and security ministers to think through.
Yeah, definitely, especially in regards to budgets. If you look at what happened in Bahamas and last year, and how various governments came together financially to assist. Now in a situation where everybody's in an economic bind because of COVID-19, what will be the capability of the region to support each other? Absolutely.
And this brings us to why CDEMA was created. And and it's important that I raise this, because I think far too often we don't point to the good work we've done as a region in thinking way ahead. The creation of CDEMA came with the creation of what is called the Emergency Assistance Fund. It was a fund that was supposed to be invested in to the point where it could provide those resources that could facilitate a response to an affected country. And in view of that, it would be the member states themselves coming together through this fund to respond. So, we know now that given the COVID crisis and countries having not only to spend on health equipment and retrofitting building spaces, but also having to provide support packages for individuals who are on social support systems or who are on the edge of the lines of poverty, people who live day to day. So our governments are having to divert resources into addressing these issues. Some of these resources would have been set aside to be drawn down on in the event of a major hurricane. It is now having to serve the purposes of a COVID-19 scenario. And the question of whether it would be replenished in time for hurricane season is certainly something that I think they have to grapple with. And so it's very important that there is some thought. I'm not saying that the meetings and the planning sessions that they will have would necessarily yield the appropriate solution, but it would lead them to think through how they will cope in the face of these particular scenarios and challenges that can emerge given the current environment we're operating in now.
Well, in the current environment we're operating in, when you think about the region and everything that we've just discussed, is the region, if you think right now in this moment, is the region really ready for Mother Nature this year?
That's a that's an excellent question, and I'm always a very tough judge in terms of our readiness. It's something I've grappled with. I've often thought that as countries who have this particular challenge, there's more we can do. And so I would say collectively, and I'm never happy with where we are in terms of the level of readiness. Because I know we can do more, and it is evident after each event, as you have pointed out, the outpouring not only of our governments, but of our citizens. Yes. And so it's really about how do we package that before the event occurs and channel that into a comprehensive readiness program that allows us to have the sort of predictable resources that can be deployed to either support one state or a multi-island situation. So it's there, it's within us as a region. It's how do we get to channel this into the preparatory stages and not leave it until the after event stages. So I think we're not there. I think we will have to, and we here now is the collective we, member governments with their emergency management mechanisms, CDEMA working in partnership with its regional community of actors, the media, civil society and the private sector. We're going to have to come together and try to influence the minds of our people around doing what we need to do, given the fact that we still have the hurricane season to contend with. We still have nature's potential blowback to deal with. You notice I didn't use the word wrath.
I know. I know you're trying to, kind of make it easy, make it a little easy on us.
Yes, I think one of the things that challenges us sometimes is that we can be paralyzed by the fear, right, into thinking that we can't do anything, and there's much that we can do. So I'm trying to use words that will, encourage us not to be fearful, but to see this as something that we can in fact tackle if we put our minds to it, and if we're working together on the problem. So that's the message I want to send around that. So we're not there, but we can be there. But it's going to take a collective effort to kind of shape the thinking around what we need to do to get us there. I'm hoping that out of a very bad situation, which is the COVID-19, can come a sort of cultural shift to how we deal with these situations of crisis at all levels. So, we're hoping that, this could be the sort of start of the transformative agenda that we want to see. We present the COVID-19 crisis within the context of resilience. We don't divorce it from the conversation we're having around resilience. And so we're hoping that, the transformative processes, governance arrangements, the cultural shifts that are necessary to see us become more of a resilience people, and not speak of resilience only in the fact that we will survive this, because we will, and they will say we're resilient. I'm talking about in terms of our practices and the pillars that we look at when
active
we talk
resilience.
Yes, active resilience.
Yes. Yeah. Since we're trying not to be all doom and gloom, from an environmental perspective, What has the impact of COVID-19 done for the environment?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question.